Over the span of the universe's history, time is for the most part immaterial. Stars are conceived, they live, and they bite the dust. Billions of years pass by in tremendous measures of room unnoticed. Einstein gave us that time extremely possibly matters when there is somebody there to be influenced by it. In this rundown, we will investigate occasions or creations for which the fundamental science can be estimated to short of 1 second. Radio, first wireless message across the Atlantic. Utilizing Samuel Morse's code, the message required a key, a battery, wire, and a line of shafts between stations for the wire and a beneficiary. The message had been being used for around 50 years when Guglielmo Marconi concocted his remote variant. Toward the finish of the 19th century, Marconi refuted everybody when he sent a remote message over the Atlantic. Beginning in 1894, Marconi began sending transmissions once again short separations. In the long run over the English Channel in 1899. At long last, on December 12, 1901, Marconi was in Canada when he got a message from England. The message was straightforward. The Morse code signal for the letter S. The transmission didn't follow the arch of the Earth as some had proposed, rather it reflected off the ionosphere and withdraw toward Canada. Radio waves travel at the speed of light. Considering air impedance, the transmission was still almost quick. Transistor switching speeds. Developed in late 1947, the transistor was something that altered the hardware business in the 20th century. Creators William Shockley, John Bardeen, and Walter Brattain in the long run got the Nobel Prize for their efforts. The exchanging velocity of these early germanium transistors finished out at 60 GHz, which means it took around 20 nanoseconds, 20 billionths of a second, to switch. Upgrades, for example, changing from germanium to silicon, and making the advanced transistor chips with worked-in resistors, altogether improved the capacities of the transistor. Today the quickest exchanging transistors can work at an amazing 800 GHz or more. Edison turns on his light bulbs. Thomas Edison was not the first to take a stab at utilizing power to illuminate a room. In 1802, Humphrey Davy concocted the primary electric light known as the electric arc lamp. Notwithstanding, it didn't remain lit for long, and was excessively splendid for ordinary use. In 1874, Toronto clinical circuit repairmen Henry Woodward and Matthew Evans constructed their lights utilizing various sorts of carbon bars held between terminals in glass chambers loaded up with nitrogen. They couldn't sell their development, and wound up offering their patent to Edison. Edison would proceed to consummate their work and reform the light bulb. On December 31, 1879, Edison flipped a change, making electric flow race through wires at near speed of light, 186,000 miles for every second in a vacuum. In spite of the fact that the bulbs Edison utilized 140 years back presumably took a second or two to be completely lit. The most chronicled brightening since the disclosure of fire took an insignificant part of 1 moment to start. The bullet that killed Lincoln. On April 14, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln and his better half were appreciating "Our American Cousin" at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. John Wilkes Booth snuck into the private box, and discharged a slug from a solitary shot .44 gauge Derringer gun into the rear of Lincoln's head. Despite the fact that it took around 9 hours for Lincoln to terminate, the procedure that prompted his possible passing was a lot speedier. As little as the Derringer seems to be. The slug, despite everything, exits the weapon after trigger pull with surprising speed. At the point where the weapon's sledge hits the discharging pin, The slug exits at somewhere in the range of 500 to 700 feet per second. It took about a couple of thousandths of a second for the projectile to make a trip from barrel to effect. While somewhat delayed in the field of handguns, some can get up to 2,000 feet per second today, the Derringer was still bounty sufficiently speedy to outdo Honest Abe. Conscious thought. Archimedes was dealing with taking care of the issue of whether a crown was made of strong gold when he broadly stood up from his shower, yelled, "Aha!" and ran straight through the boulevards. He had understood that when the water rose as he plunked down, the light power on his body was equivalent to the heaviness of the dislodged water. He presently had an approach to quantify the measure of gold in the crown utilizing his own Archimedes principle, while Archimedes had been taking a shot at an answer for this issue for some time. His aha second arrived in a clear moment. Investigations of the reaction of neurons to upgrades show that it takes somewhere in the range of 300 to 500 milliseconds, a large portion of a second, for the mind to respond and impart signs to the body. Next time you are lost in a fantasy, maybe the following extraordinary development may simply fly into your head. It happens quick, attempt to record it. Internet's first message on October 29, 1969, utilizing an exploratory association called ARPANET, specialists at UCLA sent the primary message across organized PCs. The message got by Stanford specialists read, "Hello." It was expected to peruse "login," as that was the secret phrase for the framework. Yet the framework slammed after only 2 letters. Both schools had as of late introduced interface message processors, or switches as we currently know them. When Stanford got its SIMP, a fast line was placed in to associate the two. There was currently a 2-hub arrange, empowering somebody to utilize a PC at one school to get to the assets on the other school's PC. The ARPANET line speed at the time was 50 kilobits per second. With 8 bits in a single byte, 2 letters of the letter set would take 16 bits. After a touch of math, we get something in the area of a couple of 10,000ths of a second in transmission time. It is no big surprise that we get so irate today when it takes even seconds to stack a page on the web. They set the bar high in 1969. Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The 2 nuclear bombs dropped in Japan in 1945, Little Boy on Hiroshima and Fat Man on Nagasaki, promptly modified the course of World War II. The bombs caused wrecking harm that would keep going for decades. Little Boy was a uranium-powered bomb that detonated with around 13 kilotons of power. Hefty Man was controlled by plutonium and yielded 21 kilotons of power. At the point when one free neutron crashes into the core of a molecule of radioactive material, it thumps a few additional neutrons free. This makes vitality be discharged, and the recently liberated neutrons strike more cores. This chain-responsive vitality discharge spreads quickly. A free neutron goes at about 3% of the speed of light. The total procedure, in the wake of representing the quantity of ages required for a chain response, takes about a microsecond, or 1/1,000,000th of a second. Physicists at Los Alamos nicknamed this time a shake, as in, as quick as the shake of a sheep's tail. In only 2 shakes, somewhere in the range of 60,000 and 80,000 individuals were burned in Hiroshima and 40,000 in Nagasaki. Search engine results. 1990 saw the formation of Archie, broadly viewed as the main internet searcher. With such huge numbers of approaches to limit look-through utilizing Archie, it took any longer to pick all the unexpected boundaries in comparison to it accomplished for the list items to return. Archie, and possible companions Veronica and Jughead just had the ability of looking through titles and depictions. None of them recorded the substance of any of the archives they found. Over the following scarcely any years, a lot more web search tools popped. However, none crept the whole content of each listed page until WebCrawler in 1994. We as a whole utilized Lycos, Excite, AltaVista, and Ask Jeeves at once or another. We additionally recall being on dial-up and hanging tight for what appeared always extremely, only a few anguishing seconds for our results when Google bounced on the scene in the late 90s. They started to utilize a calculation that set a high incentive on page positioning. Today, Google is for the most part a rec-hawking restriction for money. Yet run a hunt on practically any cutting-edge web crawler, and it quite often takes not exactly a second. Splendid pursuit locals like DuckDuckGo don't uncover all that goes into their strategies to give us such expedient outcomes, yet when it is that quick, does it make a difference how